He was humiliated in front of the entire class, mocked by the very teacher who was supposed to guide him, all because of the bold red MAGA hat he wore with quiet pride. The room buzzed with laughter and judgment, but no one knew who his father was, or how one meeting would change everything. When the truth came out, the tables turned in a way no one expected. Let me take you back to the moment it all began. The sunlight streamed into the history classroom as Jacob, a confident 15-year-old with a bright red MAGA hat perched on his head, walked through the door. He was used to attracting attention with his choice of attire, but today felt different. The new semester had just begun, and he was determined to make his mark, even if it ruffled some feathers. Mr. Holden, the history teacher, was an outspoken advocate of progressive ideals and had a reputation for engaging students in heated debates. The moment Jacob entered, Holden's eyes narrowed, his gaze fixed on the bold lettering of the cap. It wasn't just an accessory to Holden, it was a statement, a challenge. "Well, isn't this interesting?" Holden remarked, his tone dripping with sarcasm as Jacob settled into his seat. "A bold choice, Jacob. I hope you're prepared to back it up. You know, history has a way of judging symbols like that." The class erupted into a ripple of chuckles. Jacob, unfazed, glanced up at the teacher and replied calmly, "It's just a hat, Mr. Holden." Holden leaned against his desk, arms crossed. But no symbol is ever just anything. It carries meaning, intention, and impact. And this one, well, I think we can all agree it represents something divisive. The air grew heavy as students turned in their seats, eager to see Jacob's response. But Jacob, ever composed, merely shrugged. "I'm here to learn history, not rewrite it. If my hat bothers you, maybe you should consider teaching about why it exists instead of judging it." Holden's lips tightened. The back and forth had shifted the mood of the room, and Jacob's calm demeanor only seemed to stoke the teacher's irritation. "We'll see how that logic holds up when we start discussing historical symbols," Holden said. Class dismissed. Jacob walked out of the room, head held high, unaware that this was just the beginning of a much larger conflict. A week later, the tension between Jacob and Mr. Holden reached its peak. The teacher had announced a class debate on tolerance and divisive symbols, making it clear that Jacob was to represent the opposing viewpoint. Holden's choice of phrasing left no doubt that he intended to put Jacob on the spot. The classroom buzzed with anticipation as the debate began. Jacob sat at the front, his MAGA hat still firmly in place, while Holden paced like a commander surveying his troops. "Today," Holden began, "we'll examine how certain symbols can create division and disrupt harmony. Jacob, since you're clearly an expert, why don't you start us off?" The sarcastic jab elicited stifled laughter from the class. Jacob inhaled deeply, rising from his seat. Symbols don't divide people. People divide people. A hat can't create division unless someone chooses to let it bother them. Holden raised an eyebrow, a faint smirk playing on his lips. "Interesting perspective. So you're saying the responsibility lies with those who feel offended, not the person displaying the symbol." Jacob stood his ground. "I'm saying that responsibility goes both ways. If we're all about tolerance, shouldn't that apply to everyone, not just the people we agree with?" The room fell silent for a moment, but Holden wasn't finished. He walked over to Jacob's desk, leaning down slightly. "And what about when that symbol has a history of promoting exclusion or hate? Should we ignore that for the sake of tolerance?" Jacob felt the weight of the teacher's words and the gaze of his classmates, but he refused to back down. "History's complicated, Mr. Holden. But if we stop people from expressing themselves, aren't we making the same mistake we're trying to avoid?" Holden straightened, clearly irked. "Maybe you should start by removing that hat. It seems to be distracting everyone from the discussion." Jacob stayed silent, his jaw tightening. The room filled with uncomfortable murmurs, and Holden, satisfied he had the last word, abruptly ended the debate. That evening, Jacob's father, Michael Stewart, received an email from his son describing the day's events. Michael was a reserved but influential figure, serving as the head of the school board. As he read through the email, a mix of anger and determination settled over him. At the next school board meeting, which Mr. Holden was required to attend, Michael addressed the room. The meeting was packed with teachers, parents, and school administrators. Michael began by describing an incident at the school involving a student and a teacher. Though he did not name names, it was clear he was talking about Jacob and Holden. Michael's voice was calm but firm as he detailed the events. When a teacher uses their position to humiliate a student for expressing themselves, they fail in their duty to educate. Instead, they teach fear and intolerance. Holden shifted uncomfortably in his seat, realizing the gravity of the situation. Michael continued, his gaze sweeping the room. This school is meant to be a place of learning and respect, not a stage for personal biases. When Michael invited Jacob to speak, the room turned to see the young boy approach the podium. "I didn't wear the hat to provoke anyone," Jacob said. "I wore it because it represents something important to me. I thought schools were supposed to be a safe place for open discussions, not a place where students are shamed for their beliefs." The room was silent as Jacob finished. The impact of his words hung in the air like a challenge no one could ignore. The school board decided to take immediate action. Mr. Holden was called upon to address the allegations, and his discomfort was evident. Facing the scrutiny of parents and colleagues, he issued a public apology to Jacob. "I let my personal feelings cloud my judgment, and I failed to create a supportive environment. I'm deeply sorry." The school board mandated that all staff undergo training on professional ethics and fostering inclusivity. Holden was placed on probation, his actions serving as a reminder that no one is above accountability. Jacob, on the other hand, became a symbol of resilience and integrity. His story spread throughout the school, inspiring other students to speak up about their own experiences. Michael, proud of his son, reminded him, "You didn't just stand up for yourself. You stood up for what's right." As Jacob walked through the halls in his MAGA hat, he noticed fewer stares and more nods of respect. He had turned a moment of humiliation into a victory, proving that standing firm in your beliefs can lead to meaningful change.